Welcome to It Feels Like Home, the podcast where real life stories contain moments of faith. I'm Lisa Shudell, and I'm here to share stories of God moments. Whether you're listening on your morning drive, taking a walk, or folding laundry, I hope you find comfort and encouragement. Good morning. Welcome, Wesley. I am so happy to have you on this podcast this morning. And I'd like you to introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about what you do, your family, anything you want to share.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's really awesome to be here. So my background, I am the tech trainer for Keller Williams office here in Woodstock, Georgia. I also run my own business, building websites, doing all kinds of different tech related things. I happen to help edit this podcast. So that's part of the way me and Lisa know each other. But to let you know some background on me and my family, currently, my wife and I have been married for just over 2.5 years, and we have 4 wonderful fur babies at home. But other than that, it's just us for right now. And then I have my parents and my 2 wonderful siblings who are now 10 and 8. So I have 2 really young siblings at my parents' house. So
Wow.
I have a story about them later on, but yeah, they're really, really awesome.
They live near you?
Yeah, so they live over about an hour. So I live in Canton, not far from where I work, and then they live over in Dallas.
Okay, perfect. I know where that
Yeah.
is. So could you kind of share with us, growing up, what was your concept of God, your background? Did you go to church? Did you not?
Yeah, so I went to, I grew up Southern Baptist. That's the church that I grew up in. Spent pretty much my whole childhood in church, and went to school and attended the same place for church because I went to a private school at the time. And then at about 5th grade, my family was going through some financial hardship, and we moved me to a public school for a temporary amount of time. And that was the first time I had to have a real big shift in understanding around like finding a new church home. That's one of the things that I've run into a couple times throughout my life, where that foundation, that rock, it can't only be in your church itself. It has to be in God, because you never know when something might shift in relation to the area you have to be in or the space you have to be in. So yeah, even at a young age, that was something that I had to face when it came to church. And so now we're up in Canton, and our home church right now is Revolution Church up in Canton. So but we really love it there. We're trying to get connected and plugged in. Again, we've only been there for a little while, up in Canton for a little while. So trying to build some community.
Could you share do you remember when you like first understood God or felt like you knew him, or when you were saved?
Yeah, so when I was 7 years old when I got saved, and my grandfather, I call him Papa because we're here in the South, but he is a pastor. And so growing up, he talked a lot to me about, the seriousness of salvation, like even at a young age, like what the meaning of salvation meant, and like not just giving your life to Christ, but committing your future, like the rest of your life to Christ and the actions that come after. So when I was 7, after, talking to him for like a couple years about it, we sat down and prayed together, and I gave my heart to God. And that was, first of all, that was a while ago. But second of all, that was just such a special moment for not only the fact of just giving my life to Christ, but getting to do it with somebody who has been there for my entire life. And what I will say, though, in regards to salvation at a young age, first of all, a lot of people, they go to church and they say they pray the prayer at like 7 years old or 5 or whatever age. And it's this kind of whatever thing. One thing that has reoccurred in my life has been almost a recommitment to my faith a couple times throughout my life, just due to the fact that I've been in church my entire life. Because it's been my surroundings. You almost get comfortable in the things that you're doing, even if they're not the right things that you should be doing. So yeah, so that was the first moment, and so that's kind of where I found my foundation in Christ.
Have you, kind of the theme of this is like God stories and like how God speaks to you. Can you think of an example of a time that God was telling you to do something or to change something?
Yeah. So one of the biggest stories of my life. So me and my wife, obviously, we've been married for 2.5 years, but we've been together for 6 years, almost seven. 7 will be in April. We've been together, and when we were dating, um, one of the first things that we ran into as a couple was we were both in the middle of college, and I ran into the fact that I did not like the degree I was pursuing in college. And I had a big shake up moment where God told me, like, this is not where you're supposed to be. And I had to face that. And first of all, what's the one thing that's the most important thing in faith, I believe, is it when God allows you to find that person that is supposed to be your person for the rest of your life. They should be the rock and anchor that helps you understand what God is trying to tell you in those moments. She came alongside me. She said, look, if God is steering you in this direction, there should be no fear involved. You should just trust that He's going to take care of you no matter what change you make. So we sat down together and I looked through degrees to change to, because I was in computer engineering for the first half of my college career. And I went to one class one day, and this professor, the way he spoke and taught, I just did not understand it. I had never been bad at school. And it was a moment where it was like God was telling me, this is not what I designed you to do. This is not what I built you to do. This is something you built up in your head thinking, hey, this is what I can do. So I should do that, and I shouldn't follow exactly what God has for me in my life. And so in that moment, when we sat down to look at degrees, she helped me just kind of go through and talk through what God had been talking to me about. And one of the biggest things that spoke out to me and helped me decide what I wanted to change to, which ended up being cybersecurity, is my official degree title. I don't quite use it the way that you traditionally do, but I'll get to that in a second. But what we decided was one of the biggest things that God was trying to tell me was that what mattered most to me was helping people and actually serving people either one-on-one or in a group setting. And being an engineer, you don't get to do that. You're always in the back. You're never getting to interact directly face to face with any kind of consumer. You're the guy in the back who does all the grunt work. And so I think that's ultimately why God was steering me away from that, because He knew that was just not going to be fulfilling for me. And that was a moment that God really stepped in and said, hey, we need to change what you're doing, because it's not my will for you to be here. And what's really cool about that is I changed degrees. And then towards the end of college, just over 3 years now, I got an invite from a family friend, Brandy Black, to come work with Keller Williams. And you would think, coming from a tech background, that working with real estate agents would be a totally different ball game, but it was exactly where I needed to be. It was the opportunity of combining the tech plus the helping people aspect of what I do that really just made my career something that God had inspired.
That is awesome. I knew that you were friends with Brandy's son.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize this was your first job, and I can say from personal experience that you are, first of all, you're brilliant with technology. You've helped me with email issues, with this podcast. I couldn't do this without your help. So I'm very grateful. And you have been very generous with your time. And I just feel like you definitely are in your purpose and where God wants you to be. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that. And just to speak, I didn't even talk about this before, but I had worked at like technology retailers and stuff like that before getting into Keller Williams, and I always thought that I was going to end up at some cubicle style job. And God said, "Hey, no, not quite. You're going to do something different." And yeah, between Keller Williams and what I do with my company, WM Tech Solutions, I am just more than fulfilled. So I'm very thankful to be where I am.
That's awesome. So could you explain to people maybe that are listening or watching that don't believe, or they've never had that experience of God speaking to them to change a path? Like, how did you know? How did He speak to you, and how did you know it was from God and not just your own unhappiness?
So in those moments, it's almost hard to explain unless you've spent time with God and learned how to hear his voice in your own way. I believe wholeheartedly that everybody has a certain way of hearing God, whether it's a moment that or a certain type of feeling in their chest. Like, I know when I feel stressed about something, I feel it on one part of my body. And then when it's God poking me about something, I feel it entirely differently, like a nail in the back of the head almost. So I've had physical feelings before. I've also had straight up dreams before about where God is trying to direct me and say, hey, and sometimes you kind of have to understand the context of a dream. Like, it was not a dream about changing careers, but it was a dream about not being where I wanted to be. And so it sparked that thought in my mind of, hey, so is God driving me in this other direction? And then ultimately, for anyone who doesn't know how to hear the voice of God, I know this is a simple answer, but one of the best answers is to open your Bible and start reading. Because what God's going to do is he's going to point out verses to you that apply to the situation that you're in.
Absolutely.
I definitely need to lean into that again, because sometimes, you get busy with life and whatever, but in those moments where you're uncertain, especially, God gives you context, not just by how you feel, but by actual words that he has written. So that's been the biggest one for me, is honestly, when I start to feel a certain way, I start to try and match up what I'm feeling with the words that I'm reading.
Okay, that's great. So looking back on the most difficult time in your life, where do you see God's fingerprints now that you couldn't see at the time?
There's kind of two big moments in my life that have been I would say the hardest. One, when I was a kid, my family went through a really, really hard time during the 2008 financial crisis. My dad was an electrician and he had to shut down his business. And we went through a very hard time, almost lost our house. We were, living paycheck to paycheck. And first of all, that taught me a lot about responsibility and understanding, carrying the weight of the responsibility that God has put upon you, whether it's as a parent, whether it's as just an adult doing a job, whatever it may be. But that moment for me really defined that God was ultimately in charge of our care. We don't get to decide what our life is going to be like. We can make decisions, but God's going to laugh at those every single time if they're not the ones that he wants for us. I remember a moment pretty like about I'd say less than a year into that financial crisis, and my dad had lost his business. He started working a part-time job, and it made just enough. Like, literally the moment that we were almost out of money was when he got that job. And watching my dad pray and thank God for a moment for a part-time job was a moment that made me realize, like, wow, God really shows us how even the smallest of miracles are something to be thankful for, because in that moment, that miracle seemed really, really big for our family. And then the second time in my life that I would say there's been huge fingerprints has been actually more recently. So me and my wife, her parents were both diagnosed with cancer back in 2023. And we weren't sure how everything was going to go. They had both of them had a terminal diagnosis, and we weren't sure how things were going to go. We weren't sure how, it was at a time where we weren't financially secure either. Thank God we are now, but it was a time we weren't 100% sure where we were going yet. It was right before we were getting married, like less than a year. And we just kept praying, and we were uncertain through that entire time how things were going to play out, when things were going to happen. And I watched God orchestrate a beautiful piece of art, even if it was tragic in some ways, because he allowed both of her parents to be at our wedding and in decent enough health to physically be part of the wedding, which was a huge, huge thing for us. And then I want to say not even 3 months later, her dad started to decline rapidly. And we got to be there for him in his final moments. And then about a year later, her mom went through the same thing. So those things are incredibly difficult, and watching your spouse go through that is something that's incredibly difficult to go through, but also you get to see how God strengthens that person and also exemplifies the aspects of them that are the reason that they are your partner. I've gotten to be there for my wife in a way that I would never have been able to be there for because of this situation. I've gotten to learn some of the hardest things you learn in marriage less than 3 years in. And I'm very, very thankful for that, because I believe that it's going to help us through the rest of our lives to be true partners and, face things together rather than apart.
That's great. Do you mind sharing how you met your wife?
Yeah. So, what's interesting is we met on a dating app right before COVID. So it was the only time I ever got on a, this was also a God moment that it's one of those things you kind of tuck away, but I had never been on a dating app before, and I had never met any other person on a dating app. And literally the first time I log in, I happened to be hanging out at a friend's house over near where her parents used to live. So we happened to match up. And because at the time, she lived over in East Cobb. And so she lived over 30 minutes from me. So she wouldn't have normally shown up on my search. And she showed up and we matched. And it really was a God moment of saying, hey, here's the person who's going to support you.
Wow.
Because those dating apps, typically you have a bunch of people who are not, godly, or people who are not looking for the right things. And in that moment, we were both looking for the exact same thing. That was really just God saying, hey, this is the avenue in which I'm going to connect you, but this is my purpose for both of you. And that's just been exemplified by the strengthening of our relationship over the last 6 years. So I'm very, very thankful that God used that avenue. And it's always funny to bring up. Also, our dating relationship was very unique because it was during COVID, and we had to be very creative because nothing was open to the public. We had to, there was a lot of picnic dates and a lot of, learning to not be bored and not have to come up with things to do. So that really challenged us to grow deeper together even early on in our relationship.
Wow, that's great. I love that. One of my favorite movies is When Harry Met Sally. And what I love about it is the stories. I think at the beginning and the end of the movie, they show different couples and they tell how they met.
Mhm.
And I'm learning things about you in this conversation I didn't know, like that your dad was an electrician. My dad was an electrician also. And I met my husband through a dating service, but it was before the internet. So there was no app. It was actually like
There you go.
we just filled out questions on paper, and then supposedly this company put our information in a computer. It was like computer dating, they called it. And then they would match you up. But we both feel like they didn't really even look at what we said. They just matched you up with anyone that was local looking for dates. But it worked for us. We met, and that was 35 years ago. So
Wow, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that God even uses, the dating services that don't quite 100% work. Even in my case, I mean, especially nowadays, these dating apps are crazy. So I'm very thankful that it worked out that way for everybody. So, but yeah, there was something else I was going to say. Go ahead.
That's all right. You'd mentioned sometimes you have dreams. Do you remember a specific dream that maybe you haven't already talked about that was very clear, like you had a dream and you woke up and was like, okay, I know that was from God?
Yeah, so this is, well, I'll talk about one that was in the past and then one that actually is really, really more recent. I had a dream about the time that I was going through everything in terms of trying to change my degree, decide what I wanted to do in college. That was just basically a dream of all of my friends gathering around me. Like, I had a group of friends from high school, and all of them gathered around me. And in that dream, they looked at me and they said, "We don't recognize you." And I said, in that moment, I was like, I like, it hit me in the chest. They were like, "We don't know who you are." And I was like, "What?" And I came out of the dream. And it's almost like one of those dreams where you have to really read into it and understand what God was trying to point out in that moment. And it took me a little while to be reading the Bible and to hear his voice around it. But it was saying, if you continue down this path, you are not going to be the version of yourself that I have been working to create. If you continue down this path, you're not going to be happy with yourself, and neither are the people who know you truly and deeply.
Wow.
And so it really was a wake-up call where it was like, hey, you need to change course, because whatever you've built up in your head is not what God has for you.
And that was when you changed your major in college?
Yes. And some people say, oh, changing your major is not a big deal. I want to say I was 3 years into my major when I changed it. and I had to let go of about a whole semester worth of credits that were towards that degree, and it really changed everything because I'd always been kind of a perfectionist in terms of what I wanted in my life. And that's something that God has always kind of tried to drag out of me a little bit. He's always trying to tell me, hey, like, I'm giving you what you need. You are okay where you are at. It's okay to continue to want to grow, but do it in my time, not yours.
Yeah.
It took me a total of 5 years to get through college. And at first, I thought that was a nightmare. And by the end of it, it all worked out. And it was the perfect timing that God had planned for it to be because he's in control of those things. And then the other dream, actually more recent. So I actually have a friend right now. And this is something that if anybody in the audience wants to be praying for, or Lisa, I'd appreciate it if you pray for him as well. But I have a friend who recently, he's the exact same age as me. So he's one of my childhood friends. We have the same birthday. And he recently had what is called a spinal stroke. And he ended up in the hospital with half of his body paralyzed. And he has kind of a 50-50 shot of recovering at this point in terms of like full recovery, being able to use his body again. And I've been really praying to God, like, why? And like the questions you always ask when big things happen, like, why? Is he going to be okay? Like, where are we? Like, what's happening here? And recently I had a dream where in the dream, so I've gone to see him in the hospital a couple times. He's up at Emory in Atlanta. And in the dream, he was sitting in a hospital bed, but nothing was connected to him. And he turned to me and he said, I'm okay. Like, my friend turned and said that to me. And looking at him where he's at right now and comparing it to that dream, I just know God's going to use, first of all, his testimony, because he has a really strong testimony that I won't get into right now. But he might be somebody that once he's recovered should come on this podcast because he's really, really awesome. And his name is Alex, for those praying for him. Yes. But he's just going to have an amazing testimony. And the fact that I get to call him a friend, and ultimately I really call him a brother, because growing up, this kind of goes back into my family, but growing up, I was an only child until the age of 18.
Oh, wow.
When my parents started to go down the path of being foster parents. And so at 18, my mom comes to me, and she had been kind of talking about it on and off for a couple of years, but she was like, hey, we're seriously doing this thing. We're gonna be foster parents. Are you good with it? Because I was still living in the basement at the time. So they were like, are you good with the house being a little louder? And I was like, look, if that's what God has for you, if that's been put on your heart, I want you to do it. And truthfully, even though it wasn't my God moment, I got to watch them have their God moment with who are now my siblings, Antonio and Bella. And they were the first foster kids my parents ever had. And we like to say foster fail, because they really just ended up being adopted in the end. And we are so thankful for that. But they were, when they came into the house, Bella was 3 months old and Antonio was 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I was 18. So it was a big shift in terms of our household and the life that had been for forever the same thing. And God really shook it up. And I've gotten to, like, those changes have allowed me to see my parents being parents again. And understand the things that I value so much about the way they parented me, and watch those things be passed on to my siblings. And then on top of that, I get to be support to my parents and ultimately be a support to my younger siblings as they grow up. So I'm super, super stoked for that. They're doing great. Antonio, like I said, he actually turns 10 later this year, but he's rocking it. And then Bella's 8 years old. She's a Spitfire, and we love her very much.
That's great. I love that. Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story. I know it's going to encourage a lot of people. And I want to also remind listeners to pray for Alex. And we are trusting God to heal him and to have him come on a podcast and tell us how that worked out. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it. You're awesome. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me. If this episode encouraged you, I hope it felt like home. Remember that you're not alone. And if someone came to your mind while listening, please share this podcast. Take care and God bless.